Right, there we go. Mark, fresh back from Portugal, out there working with a group of young aspiring athletes. How was your trip?
Yeah, it was great. Weather was great for me. It wasn't too hot, it wasn't raining, and only saw one mosquito. So win-win. That will not be the same in the summer. There will be mosquitoes chasing down my pale skin to have a bit of a lunch. But I will do all I can to prevent their meals being me on that. But yeah, great. It was Edge Golf College. So again, I'm there twice a year. With each of the terms, with the players developing their independence and interdependence in the software around performance, not just in golf, but what they need to do in their preparation, their critical path, their spider's web, their planning their time, their day, reviewing, all based on judgment decision making to be performance behaviors aligned to their technical tactical in the golf world. So perfect example, Stuart. We did a lot on the ARP and we really broke it down, took away some of the areas that were hindering them to focus on it, i.e. the score line, etc. And you could see the depth of change in their attitude, being present, the performance and judgment they were making, their freedom on the strike. Within a week, it was transformational in how they saw the game. So another great example of using ARP live.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to cover that again because there's some stuff that we probably some bits from the end. There was me as well thinking that, you hardened Royal Marine Commandos were impervious to insects, but clearly not.
Well, don't forget Army Commandos, Stuart. Army Commandos and
Army Commandos. I keep forgetting that.
Yeah. Any fool can be uncomfortable, as they say.
So before we get jumping into this, some people tuning in will remember that in the last episode we announced that we had a little competition running where people can access Mark's learning space with thousands of hours of content and also access to some one-to-one mentoring with Mark. We will be announcing that at the end of the show, so keep listening through. And the other thing to say as well is please like, subscribe, share, let more people know about the show. Not only we think it's a good thing to share this content because obviously lots of people can benefit from it, and the more people can send it out to others, gift it, pass it on, pay it forward, then that's a great thing. And it also helps to grow the show, which is important from our perspective, so we can produce more content. So Mark, today we're talking about the 5 killers of performance, which is something that you were delivering when you were out in Portugal. It's an interesting area. We're going to jump straight into it, but I wonder maybe just give a bit of an intro or a bit of context to where the 5 killers of performance come from and the kind of framing, and then we'll delve into each one and as we go through.
So over the decades working in global corporate business, in elite professional sports, international, into clubs and even into the education, particularly in the management area and at athlete level at all ages, one of the real impactors keeps coming back where the elements that are preventing them either being successful in the moment or being successful as an organization or even as a small group of people, these 5 what I call killers of performance keep popping up that actually, oh my God, this is why I'm not being successful in my attitude, my behaviors, my choices in the moment because I'm focused on these or I'm not doing these correctly. So it became just a 5, not because generally you get top 3 or 5. It was just 5. Now, there are so many other elements, but these are the ones that echo into pretty much every organization I go into.
Right. Okay. So let's go in the first one. So the first one we're going to talk about is false expectations. Right. Tell us more.
So this, if I explain it in the simple nutshell, then give some examples. This is where somebody sets an expectation of themselves or of others that is too high for reality, or it's what they believe can happen on their best day that they did once before. And they're expecting that every single time. So what that tends to do is builds frustration, disappointment when what they expect is not seen by themselves or by what they see in others. And this then can be a vicious cycle of how you deal with that, your interventions, your reflections, even your state and your motivation. And just by being clear on what I call now capability expectations, and linked into number 2, which we'll share in a minute, how they can be real problematic. So I'll give you an example with golf, because I was at golf last week, is the amount of players go out into competition and they pick their club and a certain swing, and their expectation is of they've chosen this club and where they want the ball to go, because a few times on the driving range a few weeks ago or a few months ago, this is the actually in the distance they had on the driving range. So already they have this expectation, and then they get over the ball, 2 things happen. Doubt sets in and go, well, actually, can I do this now? I'm not sure I can now. Or they strike the ball and the outcome is nowhere near their expectation, and then they start that negative spiral. I'm not playing well, or what's wrong? And now it leads to the next shot. So that's an example in golf. In a business setting, if you look at, you could apply that again itself, but also with managers, directors, with teams of people, sometimes they have an expectation to go, well, I expect this team to do this because I've seen them answer or tell me this. I've seen it once, so therefore I should expect it every time. And it's not, they're not yet at a level of consistency when they can achieve that every time. So then they think people are underperforming. They're not even looking at the variables. And so then they're disappointed or frustrated. And then sometimes they end up micromanaging or sharing subconsciously or consciously their disappointment in the outcome, which can then cause a bit of a negative ripple through that interaction with that group of people. So there's 2 examples. One is itself, but also in sport and in business. There's one of our expectations on others that we're managing.
So what you've reminded me of, and maybe to use an example from the world of work, you reminded me quite a lot of, you'll probably remember that the team I managed when I was working at England Rugby, the player development team, you came and did a few deliveries with us, and a lot of the stuff you took us through became they were our mantras. And one of the mantras was, we're ready when we're ready. And the reason we used that mantra was linked to another one that you talk about a lot, which is you've got to earn the right to move on. So what you made me think about was there was a tendency sometimes for us to think, right, well, we've sort of cracked that now, we're going to move on to the next thing. But the reality was, and so we had false expectations about what we were going to achieve next. And I know I do this in coaching sometimes as well, where, I think, all right, we've cracked that one. We've had a couple of sessions on that. We're going to move on to the next thing. But what I didn't do was test that actually some of the stuff we'd worked on had become embedded and was now, kind of normalized and part of the sort of behavioral matrix within the group. And so when we moved on to the next thing, which maybe had a bit more complexity attached to it or whatever it might be, quite often there'd be quite a lot of skill breakdown, and that'd be really frustrating for both me and athlete. Likewise, in this working context, we moved on to sort of a new project or a new phase of a project, but we haven't really cracked some of the foundational elements of the previous bit of work. And so we found ourselves struggling and having to come back a step. And it's because we hadn't properly thought through what we need to do. So again, we had false expectations of when we were ready to move to the next stage, which caused lots of struggle and angst and pain.
And let me link that into, from a mentoring point of view or a deliverer point of view, where there's an expectation of change when someone leaves your intervention time, whether it's a training day, whatever it may be. This is obviously a fall down with sporting organizations or businesses after a training day, where they agree. A great example is, I'm going to go away and film myself, or yes, I'm going to use these principles now. I fully understand, Mark, we're going to use them, or whoever's delivering. And then the deliverer thinks, oh, so we've all agreed, we all know it, we all are clear on what to do, and we all agree we're going to commit to it. Great. So this is what I should expect then. The reality is we're dealing with human nature, and as soon as they walk out that room where it's all about our conversation, they're now focused on all the work elements, all the pressures and situations. And the reality is, if I, as a deliverer, a consultant, a mentor, if my expectation was what everyone says they're going to do, they will do, that in itself is false expectations. Because I've done this too many times to understand, even though people are committed in this room now, even though I can break down the bounds, go, really? Well, hang on, where are the hurdles? we're still going to get a regression in the behaviors because it's not yet embedded. This is extra time. Sometimes people forget. So my expectation was if everyone agrees to do something, they're going to do it every time. That's a false expectation that can be a killer in perceived success or not of a delivery or an intervention. And this is why I spend a lot of time on adherence strategies and supporting change. So that, again, linked to your example, working with the RFU, Stuart, that's another false expectation example.
Yeah. False expectation of the speed of progress and speed of change. I'm very guilty of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually quite a nice jump off to the next one, I think, because these two they're always linked, aren't they? But this is really linked. Yeah. So the lack of clarity as to what success would look like is number 2.
Yes, I would say everyone over the last 10, 15 years that's worked with me would know the saying, eliminate the grey, of the amount of times when we think people understand things or we think we understand, but actually it's not clear of roles, responsibilities, permissions, what ifs. So we get this area of grey, or we get often what we can call invisible expectations. I think you mean this. Yeah, I definitely mean this. Are we all clear? Yes. And then off we go. And what happens is not what we think is going to happen, or not our expectation what's happened. And then it starts to unravel in many, many ways. Based on that, Stuart, could you give me an example that echoes in your world within the last year where you go, yeah, that's happened?
Yeah, there's been a number. But the one that I suppose springs to mind most readily is probably when I made the leap into self-employment, and kind of expected, my sort of success criteria were that the phone would ring off the hook and I would be booked up to my eyeballs for a number of periods of time. And what I hadn't appreciated, of course, is that actually not everybody knows that you're now a freelancer, and also not everybody knows what you do, and not everybody knows why you do what you do, and all those sorts of things. So there's a need for me to almost reintroduce myself to the world as a freelancer with a range of skills and a range of capabilities. I still don't think I've cracked that, by the way, but I had a massive false expectation about that, and I think I've probably been playing catch up. And also, we spoke before Christmas, and in fact the run up to planning some of this sort of stuff, and I probably got myself into a bit of a downward spiral mentally because of that. I'd sort of my expectations were definitely massively out of kilter, and also I was really unclear as to what success would look like. And actually, what I now realise is that you've got to put the hard yards in, haven't you, in order to kind of rebuild your new identity. And so I definitely felt that.
And if you relate that now, let's go back to a golfer, then let's use other examples, is the amount of times a golfer will plan, and relate this to any athlete, particularly athletes that are working independently, whether that's in dressage, whether that's in Olympic shooting, in swimming. They'll plan, or their coach will plan for them if they're not engaging the athlete of, okay, we're going to work on, so a golf maybe, we're going to work on driving range. I'm going to go and do an hour on the driving range. What they haven't done is said, okay, but what is success for me when I go down to that driving range? Which area am I in? What level of stress load? Is it learning, performance, challenge it, which is language I use in level of capability and stress load? Is it a certain club I'm working on? Are there variables? Am I working on repetition without repetition within not just using the same club every single time? What is success for me? Is it maintaining my angle of club head when I come up? Is that what I'm looking at developing? So all of a sudden now, if I have that level of detail of purpose, of clarity, success, now when I go to the driving range, there's real meaning to what I'm doing, as opposed to someone else says driving range, working on my, 6-iron, whatever it may be. The clarity of success and purpose is not there. Same as a team in sport where they're saying, okay, we're going to work on defense today. Well, hang on a minute. What are we looking at? Are we looking at an outcome success here? Or are we looking at an understanding success? Or are we looking at me learning your reads with the teammates around me in the defense to know how to move and when when we're moving in shape, because that's the difference between working on defense and clarity of success and purpose will totally change my intention and attention to the success criteria. We look at it in business where we say, okay, we want to improve our sales. Let's have a sales training meeting. Well, hang on, before we have the sales training meeting, what are we identified as where our weak areas? Where specifically? Is it in the leads? Is it how we communicate? Because we got to establish that. So then when we put the training is, what is success for this training? What is the purpose? And how are we going to measure it? That training day is totally different now. And it may be we don't know the answers yet, or we can't have the training day. A great example, if we look at Formula One now, let's go to the team that I would rate in what they're doing now on the journey is Williams F1, where they've got James coming in, and it's quite clear that he understands that actually this season and last season is embedding the new people into the team, possibly moving people into different departments and moving people on. The importance of saying, actually now we are building new technology, new factories, offices. We're getting the right people in now. We've got different drivers coming in. We can't expect to be winning races if we have their bonus, but what can we expect? Okay, so clinically and critically, if we've got new people coming in, we've got to make sure they're connected into role, confidence, but also the people that remain, how are they being looked after to know how to introduce the new people? Where is our focus area for this next 3-4 months in every single department, and how can we sync people to have clarity and purpose for each stage, understanding this whole season, maybe building a foundation to be ready for the big rule changes in 2026. Now, James is someone, if you listen to him, even when there's a mistake, he'll be sharing with clarity what they did and why and how they can be better next time, because there's clarity even in the evaluation process. So there's examples from a planning point of view for an individual athlete, a planning point of view for what is success for a coach in business, and even at the highest level in sport, when you're saying, actually, we will not be winning races next season, but what are we doing this season and now to build to be better for 2026?
So what I'm hearing you say there is, and this is a nice lead on to the next one, but what I'm hearing you say is that the focus there is being really clear. So if we are going to be taking steps and we're going to be moving incrementally towards a goal of some kind, it's about recognizing the steps, being clear on what the steps are, and recognizing that the progress towards those steps is success in itself, as opposed to the sort of long-term goal or whatever it might be. Breaking down the long-term goal into the micro steps, which is the thing that a lot of people don't do.
Yeah, and I think that's where some people do. Remember, I often talk about being the detective and the brain surgeon, where a lot of people go, well, I use the GROW model, Mark. That's what I already do. So, well, that's interesting, but give me clarity on your lighthouse, but then say, okay, yes, you've broken it down. That's fine. But where is the clarity of success right now for this? How's it linked and how are you going to measure it? So it may be a behavioral shift we're looking at right now. We may not get an outcome shift because we know that's a facilitator of an outcome that builds us into the next zone. That level of clarity of purpose and success, that's where we build. That's where we're not wasting minutes or time, but that's where everyone involved can go, right, now I've got attention and intention into what my purpose is now. This is easier for me now to commit.
Yeah. So we are in danger of moving on to the next one, but you definitely alluded to this, which is the how we measure success. So, and one of the killers of performance, the third killer of performance, is only measuring success by outcome.
Yeah, it's my pet hate. It's so annoying, but now I've desensitized to the annoyance of it, and it's an understanding that it's been embedded in so many organizations, in business, in sport, in education, through no one's fault now. So it's an acceptance that it's just the way some people have culturally thought, but not actually realizing there's too many variables. That's a great example. Look at Premiership football, for example, or NBA basketball. If people are measuring success by a win or a loss, or by how many points or how many goals, then actually there's that's not helping you develop. It's back to, I remember on our podcast many years ago I had with you, Stuart, and one of the elements we spoke about was reviewing a win or a loss and at exactly the same level and way in the detail for both. There is no difference. So if you win by a huge margin or you lose by a huge margin or you draw, it's close, the evaluation is exactly the same. Why? Because the result is not giving you the meaningful indicators to see, are you on the right path? Are you progressing? Back to point 2 is, hang on a minute, we've lost, but actually remind me what we said success was. We're building towards something now. We're not yet ready, but on our success markers, are we improving? Absolutely, yes. Are we on the right path? Absolutely. Great. Let's keep going. We could win by 10 or a huge margin. And again, we might say, well, fine, we won, but actually the opposition had a lot to do with that. Let's review our success markers. How did we do? We were unacceptable based on our pre-agreed success criteria. Okay, why? What prevented us? Now we're on our journey and we're not allowing a hit of a short-term outcome result influence what our investment is and where. Same point is in some organizations and teams. They'll have a loss or they'll have a negative hit. And so they're changing everything and go, well, why did we lose? Okay, well, let's focus on that this week. And actually then it becomes this flip-flop coaching where we're just shifting from one content to the other and nothing gets embedded. And then the stress comes, the lack of belief comes. And often that's when we see teams just trying new things or getting a new player in, or, a business getting a new consultant in, getting a new member of staff in, and not understanding where is the source linked to everything we're building towards. We're saying a result, fine, but what are the performance markers in facilitators that will allow us to perform to our best? Because that's what we can mark. Back to the performances of behavior, not an outcome. Do we even know the behaviors we need to be successful in each individual and a collective in the moment? Once we nail them, we should be reviewing them irrelevant of the result. How are we doing that? Now we can look at choice execution. Talk to me about the choices execution based on what you saw at the time. We can use the ARP in a reflection process in business, elite sport, in schools, any element. So now we're engaging everyone, but getting them focused back onto where are our markers now that we can evaluate and not getting caught up in the result. So for me, it's huge. And it's an area when I go into organizations, even some of the most successful. What's interesting, Stuart, as well, when I go into successful organizations, that successful, I would say they're winning championships or they have won, is they're generally the coaches and managers that actually really connect with this really quick. Says, oh, you're right, Mark. This is great markers for me. Often it's the business owners or sports managers, coaches under pressure that actually struggle to hold on to those because you go, no, we've got to make quick change. It's about the result. So there's so much pressure on the result that not understanding is, whoa, pause, breathe. Okay, what are the key foundation markers that we can influence now that may not give you a win next week or a success based on that parameter, but now will give us our biggest return that will allow us to build? What are they? Let's look at them. How can we invest in them? And I think that, for me, is the defining difference, Stuart.
So I've got so many jump-off thoughts related to this. The first one is, it's my pet hate as well. In particular, one of the things I hate is when pundits watching sport make like counterfactual decisions, basically saying, well, that was a bad decision. Why? Because the outcome wasn't. So the decision to, for example, make a substitution or do a particular tactic or whatever it might be, often has no bearing on the outcome. There's an assumption that the two things are always interrelated. Somebody's making a decision in the moment using the best information that they've got. And sometimes that is basically they've got to go with a decision that's of some kind. And it doesn't turn out to be the right. It doesn't turn out in the outcome world. Doesn't mean it was the wrong decision. It's probably the absolute right decision. It's just the outcome didn't particularly materialize in the swings and arrows of competitive high-performance sport.
And it's funny, when you say the commentators, even at half-time or on a win or a loss, basically the scoreline is letting everyone know who's a good team and who's a bad team. England, great example on substitutions in the World Cup in soccer. When Gareth at the time made substitutions late on in the game, and they ended up scoring and winning the game. Going, what a master of substitutions!
Yeah.
Then he does the same, but they lose. Oh, terrible substitution! How do you know? You know, it's where's your time machine? It's just crazy. And again, to the half time, we see it in fights as well, in MMA and in boxing. We see it in business where they didn't get the result they wanted, or the sales, or the contract, or the performance markers, and then go, well, what did we do wrong? And we go, and sometimes they hire an external consultant. Sometimes that's where I come in and others come in. But my question is, you know, when you were being really successful, why didn't you employ a consultant then if you didn't know of what's causing the success? Why are we only doing it when we think something's gone wrong? And sometimes, no, you've done nothing wrong. It just didn't come off this time. But again, sometimes you get a win in outcome, but there's still some variables that are unacceptable or can really improve. You're a bit lucky that time. So this is where, if anyone listening to this, if they're a grassroots coach in particular, because you shouldn't be focused on those results anyway, but even elite a business, even elite in preparing for Olympics, in world championships, in F1, in MotoGP, what we got to be looking at is, where are the markers to facilitate performance, to maximize our performance potential? Let's identify them. Let's invest in them. Let's pre-agree them with clarity. Then let's review against them. If there's new data comes off the back of that we didn't know about, let's review that separately, because new data after action cannot make judgment before action, because we didn't know it. So it's separate too. You can go, right, next time with the new data, that may influence our choice, but we didn't know that at the time. So we can't then go backwards and say, oh, we should have done that. No, we didn't know. With what we had, we made the right decisions. We now have new data. So again, these variables are so important in planning success and evaluating success.
So the other thing that occurred to me when you explained this as well, as I definitely thought about this in a golfing context, because it's something that I think is absolutely important and really critical. So every time you're going to play a shot of some kind, you're doing some form of evaluation. And there are metaphors in the business context. So you're doing some sort of evaluation. So you're evaluating wind, you're evaluating lie, you're evaluating, you know, kind of what are the obstacles in the way, what are the penalties, what are the things that you need, you're trying to avoid or minimize the chances of going towards, and all those sorts of things. And you're creating a strategic picture of what it is you're trying to achieve. And then you have to go through a process of really beginning to visualize to a certain extent what your intention is. So again, you know, you take into account the variables and the data related to, you then commit to a particular action, and then you set the outcome, because there are times when the outcome isn't what you wanted it to do. But what a lot of people don't do, and I've been historically was guilty of this, but not so much anymore, is the first question I have to ask myself, and this goes back to ARP, which we talked about last week, is, did I fully commit to the intention? And more often than not, I can very quickly and easily pinpoint that I wasn't fully committed. And that's usually why I get an outcome that was less like the kind of outcome I was looking for, because I wasn't fully committed. And I do it all the time, stand over the ball and go, and I have a range of conflicting thoughts in my head. But instead of stepping away and getting committed, I go through with the shots. I don't want to waste time, etc., etc., etc. Nearly every single time, I get a less desirous outcome. Very rarely, sometimes you get the lucky outcome, but I know when it's a lucky outcome that I didn't want to get, because I know when I'm not committed. But what a lot of people do when they're playing a game of golf or in business or whatever it is, they think about the outcome they're looking for. They don't really go through the process of doing the proper sort of data analysis and the evaluation. They don't make a fundamental commitment to a particular course of action. They sort of hedge their bets a little bit and do a little bit of this and that and the other. And funnily enough, they don't get the outcome they're looking for. And going back to your point with ARP, you can only really properly evaluate if you're committed. If you're wishy-washy, well, there's so many variables still left on the table. You can't really work out whether it was what you did or didn't do that was at fault or part of the process, it could be a whole million different things. So then you go through this cycle of continuously sort of almost like just grabbing around in the fog, trying to find some sort of process or progress. And it's really, really challenging. So I think that's a major one for me that takes why ARP becomes such an important tool in the box when you're trying to navigate these 5 killers. It helps you with that process of clarity and review and evaluation and then ongoing.
100%. And that point of commitment may be for a golfer in the moment. If it's a no, sometimes we've got to ask ourselves, well, let's go back to the choice and the influences. Did I really go through that? And then did I choose based on my present capability, not on my best capability? What's the most confident I can do now? That's going to help me commit. But if still then I'm not committing, the review needs to be what's preventing me from committing. Let's explore there. Do I need support and help in that? There's a trend. But the other element in business and other sports is understanding to see success. Sometimes you've got to commit a lot, often. And it's the same with when I go into interventions and over a few weeks, they go, oh, Mark, it's not working. You go, well, how many times did you commit to it? What we agreed? Remind me what we agreed. How many times? Well, I did it a couple of times. How many times was there an opportunity to commit to it? Oh, 40 or 50. And you said you did it a couple of times. So how can you review it? And you can say, so, okay, you've got to give it the respect it needs. And that takes time. So make the right choice, commit, review, choice, execution, and commitment. Keep going, because sometimes it takes a lot of commitment before you start to see a return. But you've got to give it the respect it needs. But at least there's a framework of clarity that we're working towards, because we understand expectations, again, putting UAEs on the unacceptable, acceptable, exceptional based on my pre-expectations. So again, with golfers and in other sports and business, sometimes everybody wants exceptional every time. And you're saying, look, there's a reason why acceptable is called acceptable, because guess what? It's acceptable. And if you're acceptable every single time in sports, golf as an example, you get a good outcome. So exceptional, if you're expecting exceptional every single time and you're getting it, your bar's not at the right level. The bar's too low. Stretch it again. That's set your acceptable, stretch for the exceptional. And that clarity of going back to the earlier points, that clarity of before action is going to help you in action and post-action review, particularly in state and communication.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I actually nowadays, going back to the sort of golfing analogy, when I'm playing golf, my performance metric is out of the however many shots I play, hopefully less than 80, was I fully committed? Yeah. And I track that. There's a guy called Scott Fawcett who's got a program called Decade. And funnily enough, Mark, Decade stands for, I'm not going to be able to remember it all, but a big part of it was deciding and executing and committing. And that's where the D and the C and the E, very, very similar idea. So again, it's about making evaluations, making a commitment, and then being fully committed to what you're trying to achieve. And he actually gets you to record those sort of things. So I signed up for Decade, and that's one of the things I do. I track my progress. And my biggest focus is, rarely is it necessarily on the outcome. It's, did I make good decisions ahead of time in terms of properly evaluating, using my shot dispersion pattern and all this sort of stuff. I've got metrics about that. I've tested it. I've actually worked out what my capability is. And I know that my shot dispersion is this wide with certain clubs. So I choose targets based on my shot dispersion to avoid certain hazards and big numbers, keeping the score as low as I possibly can. So again, I'm getting information, knowing what my capabilities are, setting my expectations in accordance of that, being clear and committed, and then evaluate it. You can evaluate outcome then based on your level of commitment to the goal you're in. Sometimes it's a strategy error, like I didn't fully appreciate the landscape I was operating within, or didn't fully take into account aspects of, say, lie or whatever it is, this, that, and the other. Those are all the variables that sometimes you don't account for, and you can do that. But often people are misdiagnosing the error or the fault because they haven't either done the analysis and they haven't made the full commitment. And this is so applicable to so many of the business contexts I operate within, where people are operating with fog, no clarity whatsoever as to what is it we're what even is acceptable behaviorally, and also from a week to week process basis. and they don't establish those parameters, there's never a concept of exceptional. Why? Because you haven't even set the benchmark about what's acceptable. And I think quite a lot of business contexts that I am consulting to at the moment are actually operating with unacceptable outcomes and behaviours, and a real lack of clarity as to what would drive business performance and underperform on a continuous basis.
And lack of clarity in behaviours is so common across everywhere I've worked. It's kind of, they use buzzwords, but no, what does that look and mean like? How are we viewing it? How are we committing to it? How often are we talking about it in meetings for business in particular? Well, we're not really, unless there's a real problem. So, well, there's your problem. You know, it's like, I'm not going to exercise. I'm going to do any mindfulness. I'm not going to nail my nutrition. And the only time I'm going to deal with it is when now I'm having a heart attack or I'm morbidly obese. Oh, now I'm going to talk about it. Now I'm going to go to my GP. Now I'm going to ask for some drugs. But hey, identify early, invest in it early. You won't have to have the conversation. And going back to that point on the ARP, Stuart, businesses and sports across spectrums and even in education, what's really good about that is, and please go back to the previous episode because we covered the basics of the ARP, the deeper dive is on the online resource, is once you go through it a few times, you can start identifying where the trend for you is the target areas that are letting you down. So an example would be this week when I did a baseline and we watched the players, we identified the two killers for them within the ARP elements that were influencing, rippling others were state and commitment. So all we did on the scorecard, they had added lines for a ticker across in state first, then commitment on every single time around the ARP for each shot they took. So what we were looking for then, we placed success on those two and those two only. We didn't let them play 9 holes clean. So we said, right, we're not going on the green. When we put a target area of zone where you land in there, you can keep the ball. If not, we're going to move you to the rough somewhere. So we broke down them chasing the score. And the success was, how many can you get? Phenomenal, exceptional would be a tick, double tick for every single shot as we went through. And their whole focus then was, how's my state? And then giving them tools to be there. And then did I commit? Because they were the two that identified. Now, with someone else when we went through it, maybe I'm not scanning well enough. You know, I'm walking to a position and already making a judgment on what it could be. This could happen across all sports and business. I've got a bias. I'm not really looking at the data parameters. I'm just already deciding before I go in, I'm going to do this. So now we're limiting our choices, or it may be I'm not really looking at the influences, or that's where I'm struggling. I'm struggling to make judgment live because I'm not yet schooled and versed. My IQ of live within the variables, influences, and sport and business have all different ones to allow me to make good judgments, to allow us then to commit. And that might be as a team of people, or it might be as an individual. So this tracking and focus on an area that you identify as a ripple into the others is a great measure to get your attention intention to help you to grow, which pretty much links into all the first killers within doing that. And it links into the 5th killer as well, and the 4th killer, funnily enough.
I was just about to say there's a lovely, as if we've scripted it,
yes,
jump off point now to the next killer. So number 4, avoiding important conversations. Now, this is a major one as far as I'm concerned. I see this everywhere. But yes, let's expand. So
sometimes this can happen because the first elements we just spoke about are not effective. False expectations, invisible expectations, capability issues, lack of clarity. Either way, when you get there, it may be you dislike somebody, or there may be some relationship rapport issues, or maybe interpretational things. But we get to a point now where we're thinking, that person's not doing what I want them to do. I'm unhappy with a situation. That didn't go as I thought it would go, but it's this person. And I'm not very good at talking to this person, or this person, I've had negative experiences before, or actually, this is going to be a time pirate for me. I'll avoid it. You know, or I'm uncomfortable doing this. I'll avoid it. I won't mention anything. I've seen it in teams where somebody needs to have a conversation with the coach or the player and thinking, I'm not going to speak to them. No chance. You see it in business where I've got people saying, Mark, I've got an issue with this person. I go, well, when did you speak to them about it? Oh, I can't speak to them about it. So all that happens is the interdependency that we want. Things will happen where people will disagree. Things will happen where the expectation of what happened doesn't go according to plan. There will be disagreements. What's critical is that and I use the hot and cold reviews to allow this in business and sport and education, is if I have an experience with someone that didn't go well or something's happening, I just get people in separate groups or on their own just to do a hot review at the experience themselves, so that voice message reflecting on themselves, get them to listen back to it when they're in a calm place. And then what I do is they have to have a loop around. So the loop around, and I share strategies for this, is I have to close the loop. It's unacceptable if they do not close the loop. So they set what success is before they go in. They look at their state. What is an acceptable state for me to start this conversation? Then they close the loop, have the conversation, use the ARP. So it's dialogue for success and understanding. It's not tell. It's not micromanage. We've agreed what success is. They close the loop. We do player first, player last. So at the end, we've got the agreement. We clap, fist hands, shake hands, done. We move forward. Now, if we don't do that closing of the loop and literally we avoid things, this is where relationships can go. This is where we start getting funnels. This is where we start underperforming. An extreme level, this is where people leave the business or they get fired, or there's wellness issues where now people are getting stressed. And now when you need the conversations in planning, it's not as clean because now people aren't flowing in their conversation with others. And we get these breakages that often lead to just organizations or certain people or departments just not speaking. And then they go to a third loop. Oh, can you speak to this person? So if you're looking at any level of business, any level, even if you look at families with kids and mother and father, this is the same issue, that we always need to close a loop. And it's always better afterwards. I've never seen a situation, so long as you follow the basic principles, it is never worse afterwards. We get to a point. And it's the unspoken, not closing that loop, avoiding, that's where we start to build issues in wellness and performance disparity, and we end up with big funnels where we need a spider's web.
It's interesting to me, just to pick up on the analogy of the spider's web and the funnels. There's a reason why the funnel web spider is probably one of the most deadly. Anyway, just joking. One of the things I was thinking about this, and because I see the avoidance of the difficult conversation. Now, why do people perceive the conversation to be difficult? And again, this for me is the power of BDS as a full package, because people assume that the conversation is going to be difficult. Why? Because it's going to be full of judgment. It's going to be full of subjectivity, and it's going to be a conversation about a manager, a leader, a coach, or whoever it is having a conversation with another individual about commitment to sets of behaviors or performances or whatever it is that they're doing. But it's based on their preconceived notions of what acceptable and exceptional or unacceptable is, without pre-agreement or clarity. So that becomes extremely difficult. I would find that difficult conversation, because I would think to myself, oh, blimey, this person's probably going to react really badly. And that's because the groundwork hasn't been done. And if you've done the groundwork, which is where you've had the conversation and you've framed what is unacceptable, acceptable and exceptional, you've pre-agreed what should happen in these situations with the 3 A's, being aware of it, acknowledging, and all those sorts of things, right? What you've done is you've created the conversation architecture so that these conversations become normalized. Now, put an extra bit on this where you've pre-agreed, so that individual, by the way, they've owned this. This is theirs. This is their parameters, performance parameters that they have worked with you to create, or the team have worked with you to create. And you've also pre-agreed with them using the rule of 3, where we've pre-agreed that you're going to be taking control of and managing you're going to recognize performances yourself, or one of your peers is going to recognize those performances. If not, manager, coach, leader steps in to remind them of what it was that we pre-agreed. So the conversation has zero judgment in it whatsoever. The conversation is purely about, let's just recall again what it is that you group, you individual, said that you were trying to achieve and the things that you were trying to work upon. Where are we against those things? What can we do now to go back to the things that we've pre-agreed, because there's a misalignment between what we said we were doing and what we're actually doing? That's a really objective conversation with no judgment associated within it, purely and simply factually based on what that individual, sometimes it's purely and simply just helping them to put their attention back on the things they said were important to them, that they've moved away from by virtue of the vagaries of the world that they're operating within, or human nature, or whatever it might be. And I think, so this point is such a critical one, is that the root cause of many of the conversations and the reasons people avoid conversations is because they haven't done any of the pre-work to allow people to get real clarity as to what success is going to look like for them.
And there's a few important elements to that, Stuart. One is culture is about behaviors. So that pre-agreement of clarity, back to the other killers before we spoke about, clarity of purpose, what is success, set our UAEs, the permissions about if we don't do this. But also we've got to remember, and these are two massive points, is sometimes you're going to go into that conversation and you need to make sure you're seeking to understand, because they may have made a decision you don't agree with, but they may have data you do not. So there may be elements that's influencing their choice or their behaviors that you're not aware of. So you've got to go in going, I need to understand. Agree what purpose success is, but your now framework is, and that's where the ARP is a reflection process, taught me through. So now they're having a dialogue. You're not just, they're sitting there waiting for you to stop talking, then they have a go, which is not effective. The second point that's critical that connects with that is, and I'm generalizing here, but it's just from my experience over the years, Stuart, sports organizations, business organizations, and indeed in education, and even in parenting often, we are not training people to know how to have that interaction. So in business or in sport, people get promoted in positions now where they're managing people, and they may have good hardware skills, but no one's given them the training to go, okay, this is how you deal with what you may perceive as uncomfortable conversations. This is how you can prevent them, but this is how, if they happen, you can manage them. And this is how you can do it for yourself. Because often, sometimes the problem is you. It's not them. It's your perceptions. So now, if we're looking at it, now I'm going into a conversation, I'm thinking, right, I'm armed now. I know a framework. I know I have to do it. It would be unacceptable if I didn't. I've set the parameters of pre-agreements and what ifs. I've agreed permissions that if I don't understand, we can seek to understand. I'm now going in now. I'm honoring my side. I've got a framework I can use, but also I'm going in. I know what success is. There is no gray. And I'm seeking to understand. And I've got a really powerful framework to come out the other end with clarity from both sides. And this is, again, often when we start this with businesses and big sports or national governing bodies, there's some things we don't realize. So we can get an experienced coach or a business manager and go, right, where are all the pitfalls, Steve or Sarah? And they go, oh, these are all the pitfalls. So what's our strategy to prevent them, to see clarity? Okay, here we go. We go for it. And then something pops up we haven't even thought of. So someone makes a choice or a decision on something. We go, oh, no, that's wrong. And we go, yeah, but did we share parameters of permissions on that or UAEs? No, we didn't. That's a new one to us. Great, then. Well, that's a new one to them as well, or they were doing it and we didn't know. Now we're aware of it. Let's just eliminate the gray in that. So now we're just eliminating gray as we go. And that happens more often than people realize. So the clarity of pre-agreeing and using that framework, and then the clarity of making sure we're training the people to initiate the conversations, have a framework with confidence and competence. And secondly, when they go in, they're going in to seek to understand, and they're making sure at the end there's a clarity of success moving forward. So there's a closure to it with success actions.
Yeah, so important. There was something you said in the middle of that really sort of resonated with me, which again was when people are avoiding going back to these sorts of conversations, I think there's a real tendency to feel. Oh, you mentioned it when you were talking about the people being promoted to their level. So they promote. So people don't often have any training in management, and they're not promoted because they're really good with their people skills and their managerial skills, and they're trained in these elements. They're promoted into management because they're of their skill technically, with their technical capabilities.
Or how great they did in their previous role. And now they're in a different role.
And there's a reason why that people talk about you get promoted to your level of incompetence. And so people go into that and they don't have any managerial experience. So what they tend to do often, I see this all the time as well, is whenever there's a problem with a member of staff who isn't like performing a particular task in the way that they were hoping for, they do it because it's easier. Then actually, to them, it's easier to just do the task because they know how to do it than it is to then support the individual to become better at doing that task. And then they become the combination of micromanager, firefighter, overwork, overburden, and then become the pretty poor leader that everybody hates to work for. It's because they just haven't got any of these tools to use.
Yeah. And it's back to, remember, you were reflecting on your world, Stuart, and understanding that actually me not finding time to do this is what's killing my time. So instead of thinking about, if I was to go and do this, that's taking time away. So no. You're fixing a source that will free up more time later. So as a business manager, whoever it may be, don't think, it's easier for me to do it, or it's easier for me just to tell them, because you're not fixing the issue. You're putting a plaster on it that is just going to come back and haunt you. It's a time pirate in your world. And now they're thinking, well, I'm not going to think for myself. Boss, just tell me what you want me to do. And now we're not developing the type performance environment we want. And now the culture that we wanted to cultivate that's written on our walls, we're not honoring ourselves.
Yeah. So, and then the final killer, which is not committing to the change of behavior for long enough, or the behavior for long enough to actually see the change that we're looking for.
Yeah. And this links into, we've mentioned it in the last couple of episodes, so please go back, is that point about culture being behavior based. Culture comes from human behaviors. Often when I go into organizations, I have a long dialogue with a lot of organizations that they want me to come in for a couple of weeks or a month. And they're sharing with me what they want to change. And it takes a few conversations, sometimes, not always, for them to realize this is a year, 18 months minimum to get the shift that you're talking about, that you want to be successful and robust. So under pressure, actually it's there. Not to say you can never ignore it. You still need to invest consistently, explicitly, but set your expectations. You need to change them, because no one will give you what you say you'll need or want within a month. And so one is, we've got to make sure the expectation is, we've got to understand what the behaviors are. We've got to understand we're human beings. Then we've got to understand what framework are we putting in place to support the changes we need. Who is the mentor that's mentoring the mentors, i.e. someone like me, to go, right, if you're struggling, hey, who's supporting you? If you're now regressing and you're the one that's meant to be managing this, who's supporting you? That's critical. And that's an area that I've advanced and developed over the last 10 years, where I've realized that's where the chink often is. But also then is saying, let's set expectations of time. So let's identify our priority behaviors. Let's commit to them long enough, often enough for us to review them and earn the right, back to that point you made with the England RFU. We are where we are. We're ready when we're ready. So long as we're pursuing excellence, and the framework of support and the clarity of focus and purpose and success is nailed, and the rule of three is in there to support the peer support, then we'll get there as quick as we can. But let's focus on this first phase. Let's embed it. Let's support it. Let's respect the time it needs to be successful. Let's continue to review. If we get there quicker, fine. We can move to the next focus. But we never forget the fundamental foundation base. That's always reconnected. And then we can advance. If it takes a bit longer, that's fine. If it's an excellence in behavior thing, let's identify the source of that. Let's invest back in that. Let's go again. So this is that non-linear organicness of excellence, maybe an attitudinal thing every single day, but we still won't know the pace of the outcome. We still won't know the pace of progress because seasonal, environmental, other people coming into an organization is going to change that. Oppositions will change that. So all we can do is say, let's keep going excellence. Let's have clarity on focus of success. Let's put a support mechanism. So if there's regress, someone's there to pick me up, remind me. I'm still owning it, know how to do that. But when we see those pockets of real behavioral shift in someone, let's make sure we're recognizing it and explicitly talking about that as well. So we're not just picking people up when we say they're unacceptable based on what we pre-agreed. And this element, in my experience, is where most organizations are missing. They don't have the expertise to know how to build the adherence framework to change. And so whatever investment they do, they can have the world's best deliverers come in. They can charge them £10,000 a day. You will not see the change you want unless there's a support mechanism to support the change in the required behaviors for long enough to embed it, to shift the culture, the behaviors, and the performance that you say you need.
Yeah, I mean, so loads here, and I'm conscious a little bit of time, but this point about adherence, it's a word that you use a lot, and I think some people recoil from it because I think they associate adherence with compliance, and they're not the same. So adherence is, and again, it links to ownership. So adherence is somebody being committed and making the every time decisions and acting upon them in accordance with a set of parameters that they've established for themselves, adhering to their own behavioural, cultural, approach. And that's the bit that often breaks down. Now, that's not compliance. Compliance is when somebody else makes you, and you purely go, okay, I'll do it because you have power and I'm the only person, and I have to do it because you said so. Adherence is not that, and it's an entirely different form of leadership. And I think it's probably quite important to stress that, really.
100%. And that's that point of making sure early on in time, people buy into the value of the need that they need to change to get where we need to go, the desire. And that's that back of purpose, clarity, value, meaning. So remember, when there's value in something, you don't have to like it, but you're recognizing the need to do it. And then it's recognizing up front that there's discomfort in it. There may be a outcome regress sometimes. It's going to be clunky, but that's back to walking through the mud to get to the other island. It's a process that we set expectations on. We know it's going to happen. How can we support and embrace it? But importantly, everyone involved is seeing the need to commit to the change. And then that adherence element is honoring what I agreed I was going to commit to with clarity based on my part of the success within this journey, whether that's independent, whether it's in your small spider's web and as an athlete, or whether it's in a bigger organization. And that's the point of, are we spending time to get people to see the value in what we're doing? Are we establishing the clarity in the behaviors and the purpose and the interdependence from day one? Are we as bosses being the role model in the behaviors we're asking of others? Are we being transparent enough to say, this is going to be difficult for me as well, but I'm in it with you because we're all doing this, and show that vulnerability when you muck up, say, hey, that was me, I got that wrong, but this is what I'm going to commit to next time. I've given you permission to challenge me if I don't do these things, and I need you to, because that's important, because sometimes I'm going to forget, sometimes I'm going to be regressing back. I need your support. And for a boss to do that is then showing the interdependence of the culture and the behaviors that everyone is talking about. And when bosses make that connection and then they live it, that's the game changer as well, because sometimes I'm the rule of three within the bosses of the adherence, but we want to get to a point where their peers, which is no hierarchical. Basically, we're breaking that down. We'll have groups of peer support, whether we're using Teams, Slack, WhatsApp, where you have a head boss in with a junior person within the organization, and they're giving each other permission of accountability and support. So straight away now we're going, oh, so we're all in this. Absolutely. There's still a hierarchy in decisions of big picture, or look, we're going with this. I'm the leader. Here's the direction. But in these behaviors, we're in it together. And I'm giving you permission to honor each other within these processes. That's the true depth and richness of adherence.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that's probably worth saying actually is that I think sometimes it's hard for individuals who are within the culture of an organization, even if they're in leadership roles, to articulate this change of behavior. Obviously, that's going to lead to culture, particularly if they're not that well versed in these ideas, so they're still learning them themselves. So it does take time, and I've been on quite a significant journey for over a long period of time for this to become something that you become more comfortable with. And one of the reasons why I'm sort of doing my relearning, if you like, doing a bit of a spiral curriculum, coming back and relearning a little bit, was to just basically double check on myself around the areas that I probably have lost a little bit of sight of. But the point I was going to make was, even with it, so when you're within the culture of an organization and you're sort of part of the fabric, sometimes if you want to lead this kinds of change, it can feel uncomfortable and difficult, and you're likely to get quite a lot of resistance. So I'm bringing you in next week to one of my clients' places, because I've spent time within this organization and brought them to a point. But there's now a point to go to the next stage. And one of the areas that we've identified in my time within my clients is actually they're struggling with many of these performance killers, particularly things like avoiding important conversations, not having clarity of what success looks like. And so one of the reasons I'm bringing you in is to strengthen me in my consultancy role here, because what you're going to do is act as the stimulus over a period of time through various sessions for us to then create this sort of shared vocabulary around things like 3As, UAEs, and creating expectations and building ownership and understanding leadership and all those sorts of things. And from that then helps me in my embedded role here, using an external party as the kind of stimulus to then begin to then take us to the next stage of change. I couldn't do it until now because we probably weren't at the right stage of readiness, but we are. We've moved to that point. There's that cultural expectation and a need. They've recognized this is a need. They weren't aware of the need before. They're now aware of the need, and so therefore they're more prepared to engage. And I think it's really important to stress that this is where the value, and this is where your value add comes in, because you come in and you'll work with a group of organizations through a period of time, but you are definitely trying to make yourself redundant. I know that sounds weird as a consultant, but if you do your job right, the level of ownership for leader, staffing group, whatever it might be, or team or coach or whatever it is that they no longer need you. If they continuously need your support forever, then you are definitely not following your own philosophy and your own principles. But it does need that stimulus sometimes to actually create that initial leap off point.
Yeah, and one of the first conversations I have with new clients when they're saying, Mark, we need you to come in. I mean, an example with yours is you have a level of knowledge, but you're involved in it. So me as an external always makes that easy. And obviously I'm doing hundreds of thousands of hours over the years just doing this stuff. So there's stuff that the nuances are a lot easier. But one of the first questions I ask when I get early on within an intervention before I start day one of training is, can you identify your influencers in your organization? And who are those influencers? Can I upskill to be mentors? So straight away, we're getting them to buy into, you're a great influential person. I want to support you and add some, enhance what you're doing, add some texture to help me to support the organization. And then we do extra training with those people, and then we scale it. So we've done that with global businesses. And this is that element, Stuart, of when you say a business recognize the need change, sometimes they don't recognize where the change is, but often they just need that external to say, right, let's clean it up, Mike. Where do we start? Who are the people we need to speak to? Help us here, because we definitely have got an idea, but we've got a bunch of ingredients. We can't. The cake comes out the oven, and the cake's never tasty. In that principle of we got all the ideas, but how do we put them together? Where do we start? Mark, can you help? And one of the questions that they often don't think of is, who are the influencers? Let's upskill internal mentors from day one to make myself redundant as early as we can. But understand they may need the longest support. So while I'm stepping away, they may be the people I keep hooking in with, so they become what I'm doing in their own unique and authentic way. And that's another critical element I think some interventions don't invest in.
Yeah, dead right. Nice way to wrap things up. I said at the start of the show that you would have a bit of an announcement in terms of our competition.
Yes.
So you, so I'll leave that with you. Yeah, tell everybody.
Yes. So to eliminate our grey, the killers in the performance, is what when we shared 2 weeks ago of the elements we need to do. Clearly, some people went, "Yeah, I understand that, and I'll commit to that." But what the variable that we didn't make clear is when they heard a short clip of how to do it on another social media site, some people were just putting "count me in the comments to that one, as opposed to into this one. So what we need to do is give it another 2 weeks, eliminate the grey to make it clear, so then we can get everyone on here. So if you're listening to this on Twitter, on Instagram, on all the other sites it goes to, you need to get onto the YouTube channel, which is under the talent equation, and then look for the playlist, which is performances of behavior and outcome, which has these in. Then you write those words under here, subscribe to this channel, and also subscribe to my website, which is pdscoaching.com. Then that gets you in. So we've got a bunch of people that have done that, but we've also got a bunch of people that committed to under the social media, but that wasn't what we were asking. So we've now eliminated the grey. So we now got 2 weeks to add them. If you've already done it, you're still in. So we'll have 2 weeks now to get that clarity, to get back onto the YouTube site, to subscribe, write the comments of the count me in, and subscribe to my website, PDS Coaching. Then you're in the pot. You're in the pot, which we will then draw out in 2 weeks' time in our next episode.
There we go. Eliminate the grey. It's a little banner up there in the thing which gives you some of those instructions. Yes, don't type count me in on a different social channel. It's got to be the YouTube one. Yeah, and we didn't want anybody to miss out unfairly, because maybe we hadn't been quite as clear as we thought we had. So we thought we'd give it another couple of weeks to give more people more chance.
And that's back to new data. So neither of us thought someone could read this on other social media right under that. So that's new data. So again, new data, eliminate the grey, more clarity, and then we go again. So that's hopefully that shows that we do live by the principles that we're sharing.
Yeah, fair enough. Mark, really good conversation. Enjoyed sharing the 5 killers. I'm now going to go and try and kill my killers in some of the
not try. See what you're going to commit to.
I'm going to commit, of course I am. Yeah,
yes,
can't use that language, can we?
Yes, not unless you're in rugby and you're going over the line with the ball.
Right. Well, I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Okay. Thank you, Stuart. See you soon.
Bye.